The parents of a teenager who killed 4 students in 2021 in a school shooting in Oxford, Michigan, were sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison after being convicted of manslaughter. James and Jennifer Crumley each face those terms of sentencing. They've already spent 2 years in prison, and it had to do, of course, with their then 15-year-old son, Ethan, being involved in a mass shooting at a school in Oxford, Michigan. To talk about it this morning, he is a trial attorney. He is Jeremy Rosenthal. He joins us on the Wake Up Call. Jeremy, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much. So,
what occurs to me is, from what I've read now, from statements that were made by the jury foreman, the statements that were made by the judge, statements that were made during the victim impact statements, while I understand it was a manslaughter charge because they had given the gun to their son Ethan shortly before he committed the crimes, everybody said that they didn't feel like the parents took enough responsibility and didn't show enough, shall we say, sadness over what happened. I mean, you're a lawyer. What's your take? I know there are emotional aspects to a case, but I still, that struck me as this being a very emotional decision as opposed to, one maybe letter of the law.
That's what juries do. Juries are emotional creatures. It's a living, breathing sociology project, if you will. A group deliberation is always going to be like that, and that's one of the reasons why we like having trials by jury, is because we want the jury to be able to weigh the credibility of witnesses, to weigh the credibility of the evidence, right? The judge can tell us whether or not it's a ball or a strike, or whether or not a rule was complied with, but it's the jury who can tell you, is this a Nolan Ryan fastball or is this a Jeremy Rosenthal fastball, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not surprising to see the jury get really caught up in the motions, and that's, from the defense side, that's one of the scarier parts about going on trial, particularly when there's just so many. I mean, when it's such a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, I guess then, would this have gone maybe a different route if the parents would have shown more emotion, more, we're sorry, we don't know how to deal with this. I mean, we're victims too. It's as horrible. I mean, would this have gone a different way?
I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, a jury trial, I equate it to teaching a class. The only difference between teaching a class and a jury trial, the main difference is that there's another teacher in the room who's teaching something that is completely the opposite of what you're teaching, right? Mm-hmm. And so from that standpoint, it's really a battle of the hearts and the minds. And a lot of times, it's when you talk to jurors after a case, you really have to read between the lines. A lot of times, you can tell whether or not you've won or lost the case in jury selection based on what they say. There are people who are just simply biased, and they were never the right juror for the case. And you can tell them, look, you're not following the law. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. And they'll come up with some other rationalization to do what they really wanted to do. So these jurors were emotionally hooked, and I suspect that they were emotionally hooked before really they had a long-term ability to observe these folks. I mean, put it to you like this, in my amateur psychology, I know just enough psychology to be extraordinarily dangerous, even though they call me counselor, which it's on my law license. I don't know. I went to law school. I didn't go to counseling school, but from a psychological standpoint, what I'm told is that if you watch a tennis match and you know nothing about any of the players, subconsciously you're going to be rooting for one over the other in about 10 to 15 seconds for ridiculously random reasons, right? That one looks like my sister, or I don't like the clothes that one's wearing, or something like that. When jurors come into the courtroom, they're constantly in that struggle, in that fight. Who do I want to believe? Who do I listen to? Who's got an agenda here? Who's stretching things? And by the time that they're sitting down and actually watching these people or listening to them talk, they've probably long since made up their minds. So chances are they got emotionally hooked, maybe by some of the facts and the details of the case, some of those types of compelling things. It's really, really hard to know when and where they got wrong. But yeah, it should be terrifying to really any criminal defendant, anybody who could possibly stand trial, that a jury is this emotional roller coaster.
This is the first time that parents have been held criminally responsible for a mass shooting being committed by their child. And the judge in the case said today that the decision should be a deterrent to try and stop school shootings in the future. Is this going to be the norm going on, that if a kid grabs a gun, walks into a school and starts shooting, that the parents are going to be on trial?
I wouldn't necessarily think so. This was a really bad set of facts for these folks. Because they were in the school the morning of, and they were told or given the option of taking him out that morning. And they said, no, we'll pass. They were shown a picture. I think he drew a picture of a gun that one of the teachers saw, and that they brought him into the office. The weapon was bought 4 or 5 days before. It wasn't secured. The dad on the application to buy the firearm said, it's for my use, and I'm not going to give it to anybody else, or I'm not, there's regulations with regards to
straw man purchases.
What's that?
Straw man purchases, I think is
right.
what they're
That's
called.
Right. So there's regulations that kind of that dictate that. And the dad said, well, I had to get back to work. And the mom, there's a lot of hanky panky going on there. She had issues with her boss. So I think that the judge says, look, there's a lot of off-roads here. This was so easily preventable. But to kind of go back to what you were saying, would this be the norm? I think that prosecutors would look at this and say, okay, maybe we can start kind of digging in to the parents on these things. And I mean, you would think that there's always going to be that degree of Monday morning quarterbacking and hindsight being 20/20, especially with the parents. I mean, you can't think that they feel good. Any parents of somebody who goes that wrong, you can't think that they feel good about what happened to any of these things. And you would hesitate to say that, well, these are all really, really predictable. This one, man, it was pretty easy to prevent. At least I think that's what the jurors thought, and I think that's what the judge thought. I don't know that this is going to introduce this is going to be par for the course every single time, but it does give prosecutors a roadmap if that's kind of what they're inclined to do.
What about the school? I mean, the school, and I'm not trying to defer blame here, but the school was concerned enough. They gave him the option, we would like to have him out of the school today. Why didn't the administrator at that school just slap the table and say, no, you are taking your child out of school today. There are no questions asked. I mean, it seems to me like there's at least a certain amount of culpability on the part of the administrator at the school.
Potentially. They testified in trial that they said a couple things. They said, first off, it was the parents' decision, not ours, to take him out. And once the parents decided not to, we were powerless to do anything but keep him. And they also said, and that doesn't answer your question, because your question is, they could have stood on the table and jumped and said, yeah, that's not all nice and well, but you're taking him. Yeah. But the other part of the equation was that the counselor actually thought that the young man was more of a danger to himself than anything else at the time, based on what he had written or said. and based on the things that he had drawn. So I think they actually testified that they felt the best place for him would be in school. Now, I don't think they knew he had a gun, obviously, and the parents didn't go back home and check to see whether that weapon had been secured. And that was also part of the prosecutor's case, is that dad bought the weapon and just really did a very poor job of securing it. And I don't think this, and the father also, he did a few things at trial that didn't sound like they did himself a lot of favors. I think at one point he was accused of making threats in the jail, and just, you get some ugliness like that sometimes in trials. I don't know that swayed things one way or the other, but sometimes that's sort of how they go.
Jeremy Rosenthal, trial attorney, joining us on the Wake Up Call, not only a criminal defense attorney, but also spent quite a bit of time as well as a prosecutor before becoming a defense attorney. The idea of manslaughter, talk just briefly about how, this applied to these two parents, James and Jennifer Crumley.
There's a term that you learn in first year of law school, first year of criminal law, and that is called mens rea. That's Latin for guilty mind. And we punish intent, right? We punish guilty intent. We don't like punishing negligence. We don't like punishing accidents. And that's what's called a mental state. But there are lower mental states, right? I mean, intentional is, I point the weapon at somebody and I know it is my conscious intent to end that person's life. That would be murder, right?
Right.
Or I'm pointing a weapon at a house and I'm driving by in my car and I don't care who's in there and I just shoot. That might be what we call reckless or potentially knowingly. There's another intent element that is called criminal negligence, which is a really gross deviation from the standard of care. It is, I'm going to drive 160 miles down the highway and take my hands off the wheel. I'm going to throw a bunch of bowling balls off the overpass and I don't care what happens. So the idea behind manslaughter and the idea behind manslaughter is that it is death with that type of reckless behavior or conscious disregard for these things. And what we have here, too, is we have a couple parents who probably are guilty they had their head up their rear end. I think we can say that. But I think they're also pretty well guilty of, to put it nicely, looking at things through rose-colored glasses, right? Oh, there's nothing to see here. Oh, there's no problem here. And they were just, the mistakes were just so tragic that's why we got to where we are.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add before we let you go that maybe I just glossed over, missed, or something you think is important to point out?
These are incredibly emotional things. Juries are emotional creatures. That's kind of what they are. Most cases are won and lost in jury selection. Most experienced trial lawyers are going to tell you that. A lot of times when the case is over, you listen for what the jurors say, and you listen to hear if they're repeating some of the lines from one side or the other. That's how you can tell sort of the inside game within the game. But you try not to believe them too literally, but these jurors were certainly emotionally hooked. That much is obviously true.
All right. Jeremy, we appreciate you joining us on the Wake Up Call. You're the founder of TexasDefenseFirm.com, and we appreciate you joining us on the Wake Up Call.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.